before you start the meeting.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Anna Bailau. I am the chair of Planning and Housing Committee. The clerk has confirmed that we have quorum, so I'd like to now call meeting 20 to order and welcome everyone. Today's meeting is being held by video conference. City staff are also connecting in the meeting by video conference. As City Hall remains closed, the public will continue to participate electronically and can watch the meeting streaming live on YouTube at youtube.com/Toronto City Council Live. I ask everyone for their patience with any delays and technical issues. The clerk's staff have connected all registered speakers to the meeting by audio. The list of speakers can be viewed online by visiting the Planning and Housing Committee page at toronto.ca/council and clicking the speakers box for today's meeting. Members, this is a paperless meeting. The clerk has provided all agenda materials via CMP, the clerk's meeting portal. IT staff will be available to members to help with their devices. I would like to remind staff to keep their mics muted and their videos turned off unless they need to answer questions or speak to the committee. This will make it easier for me as chair and for those watching on YouTube to observe members as they participate in the debate and vote on items. Members, please keep your mic muted unless you wish to question staff or speak to an item, and ensure that your video is turned on. As part of each agenda item, I will ask members to raise their hand to unmute their mic if they wish to question staff or speak. I will then create a speakers list and will call on members when it is their turn to speak. When voting on an item or a motion, I ask that members ensure they turn on their video and raise their hand to indicate their vote. Members, I want to remind you that you must submit and approve your motions by email. Staff are available at phc@toronto.ca to help with motions. If there are any visiting members of council, and I don't see any, but I take, oh, sorry, Councillor Ainsley is a visiting councillor. Yes, welcome, Councillor Ainsley. And I'd like to welcome a new member of the committee, Councillor Nunziata. Speaker Nunziata, thanks for joining us for the next 2 years. Like I was saying, if there are any visiting members of council attending the meeting today, I encourage you to turn on your video so that I know that you're present and can give you the opportunity to ask questions of staff or speak. This will also assist the clerk's staff to record attendance for the meeting. Although we are in different locations and meeting remotely today, the committee would like to acknowledge that the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, Haudenosaunee, Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? If you do have an interest, please raise your hand or unmute your mic and indicate the item number and the nature of your interest. Seeing none. Next, we need a motion to confirm the minutes from our last meeting on December 8th, moved by Councillor Perks. All those in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Let's proceed with agenda review. First item is PH 20.1, election of Vice Chair, Planning and Housing Committee. So the committee needs to elect a Vice Chair, so I'll hold this item down. Second item is PH 20.2, City Planning Division Study Work Plan Update. We have staff presentation and a registered speaker, so I'll hold the item. Next item, PH 20.3, expanding housing options in neighborhoods, Beaches East York Pilot Project. We have a speaker register on the item, so I'll hold it down. And item PH 20.4, proposed review of parking requirements for new development. We also have a speaker on this item, so I'll hold the item down. We do have
item of new business, Madam Chair.
Councillor Fletcher, were you saying something to the committee, or you just had your...
Yes, I do have a letter that I sent in to the committee.
Yes, I'm going to introduce new items. We actually have a few new items that we need to introduce. So the first item I'd like to introduce is a letter from myself requesting a secondary plan west of the downtown core. Then there's another item, Committee of Adjustment, changes to improve tenant participation. Then a letter from Councillor Fletcher, update on short-term rental regulations. And fourth new item, an item from Councillor Wong Tam with regards to the demolition and in order to protect the Ontario's heritage at the Dominion Foundry buildings. If we can move all four items as a package, all those in favor? That carries. Would members of the committee like me to give them a little bit of time to review all four items and then we can come back to them? Okay, that sounds appropriate. We'll go now to the beginning of the agenda. And that is item 20.1. Are there any nominations for Vice Chair of the Planning and Housing Committee? Members may nominate candidates, including themselves, and nominations do not require seconding. So do I have any nominations for Vice Chair? Councillor Bradford.
Madam Chair, if I may, I'd like to nominate my East End colleague to continue in her capacity as Vice Chair, and that's Ms. Councillor Paula Fletcher.
Okay, I'm calling for nominations a second time. Are there any further nominations for Vice Chair? I'm calling nominations for a third and final time. Are there any nominations, other nominations for Vice Chair? Okay, hearing no further nominations, I declare that the nominations are now closed. And as Councillor Paula Fletcher is the only nominee, I declare her the Vice Chair of the Planning and Housing Committee for a term of office starting January 19, 2021 and ending November 14, 2022. Thank you, Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you very much. I promise to have my hair look a little better at other meetings.
Okay.
Same.
So item 20.2, City Planning Division Study Work Program Update. We do have a staff presentation.
Good morning, Madam Deputy Mayor and Committee. You hearing me okay? Sorry, I can't do anything about my hair this morning.
It's a bad hair day all around.
It's a bad hair day. So I think the clerk is going to set up some slides for me. I'm going to run through a quick overview presentation, and then if there are deputants, and then certainly happy to help you with your questions. Just to the Deputy Mayor and members of the committee, this is a annual, not our annual report, but an annual report that we do to the Planning and Housing Committee. Have done this now for quite a few years, where we provide a snapshot of where we are with our extensive study work program. Next slide, please. This report addresses three key items. We give an overview of what we are able to achieve last year. In 2020, it identifies a forecast for 2021. I want to also emphasize that the report speaks in many respects about a complete, what I call a complete community lens. And that is something that likely is not unfamiliar to members of committee. We often frame our planning work in the context of a complete community, because we know when we look at provincial policy and the city's official plan, certainly everything is connected to everything. And we want to be able to plan and manage growth in a way that supports daily living, daily work, mobility. So many aspects of that come through all of the main ingredients that one would apply in a complete community, or through a complete community lens. And I think very importantly, from our experience so far during the global pandemic, this has become more and more relevant. The council actually asked us earlier last year to opine on this, the impact of COVID on planning. So we provided some initial comments on that in this report. I also want to emphasize that this, the information in this report is a snapshot. It's a moment in time. Our best read of the situation across all 600 plus square kilometers of Toronto, and the diversity of geography and the diversity of situations that we have across Toronto. It's fluid. It does certainly reflect the experience of last year and project for next year. Next slide, please. Just a general framing comment, and this is also reflected in the city planning's budget submissions, but we kind of bucket our services in two ways in city planning. You're familiar with all of the work associated with development, review, development applications, how we get to decisions, and then all of the work that comes afterwards, all of that fun stuff that we need to go through to support literally thousands of applications, be it large and small, across the city. And then the other big bucket is the city building and policy development bucket. It's a really important concept to understand that these things are really intertwined and integrated. No one planner really is only focused on one thing. They're always looking at a framework and where we're going in various communities, their awareness of communities, and how that informs the review of applications. And then ultimately, the review and approval of applications informs where we want to go with planning frameworks. And it's kind of a virtuous ecosystem, I think, in the way that those two areas support each other. And we certainly array our resources to support that kind of activity. The work program, of course, is only one. The work program that you're seeing in this report is only one component of many, many things we do in city planning. But historically, over the last many years, we've tried to emphasize and bring a lot of transparency to what we're doing across the city, so that people have a total view of many, many of the things that we're doing. Also, just to emphasize that, you don't build a city alone. It's not just city planning, of course. We work with many city divisions. We work with councillors, local councillors across the city, external agencies, depending on the situation, circumstance in these studies, different groups, different interests. Certainly the residents and the future residents of the city are all important parts and ingredients into making these things happen and achieving the work that we set out to achieve. Next slide, please. So the work program is, responsive to a city, taking a citywide lens, certainly responsive to corporate and divisional priorities. The items are added either through requests over time from City Council, or they're identified by the division because we become aware of new strategic priorities. We become aware of public investment that's going on, growth pressures in various areas, and the shifts that inevitably happen over the years and in year. It's, again, a really important point to make that this is very fluid. This report is a snapshot. Things may appear to be paused, then activity happens again, because we constantly have to shift our resources and our priorities to respond to pressing matters. A couple of quick examples from 2020 being City Council's direction on getting modular housing going and supporting the work of the Housing Secretariat and creating TO, and standing up something that's brand new for the city and moving those projects through a development approval process quickly on a priority basis. Certainly another big area for us is the regulatory waves that wash over the city from the province and our need to respond to those changes in a timely manner, whether it's commenting to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs, changes to legislation that may come into effect in short order over the next little while. A big part of our work in the next year and a half or so, for example, we'll be working on a brand new municipal financing regime, which will replace Section 37. And that in and of itself is just another example of something that pops up, literally pops up during a year, and we have to adjust our capacity and our resources to respond. Next slide, please. In 2020, the achievements that are outlined in the report, again, alignment is something that we seek to really look at closely, making sure, you know, if you want to call it biggest bang for the buck, but making sure that what we're doing checks as many boxes as possible, be it our housing priorities, mobility, building livable neighborhoods, thinking about climate action, while understanding, again, how we have to adjust to changing legislation. And that is reflected very much in how we, or what we achieved in 2020, and will continue to be reflected in 2021. I think an important lens, again, to emphasize Council's ask of us, and something that we're all aware of, is how we focus our work on recovery and rebuild, whether it be implementation of TOR report recommendations and other priorities of City Council that are focused on bringing as much attention as we possibly can to recovery and rebuild priorities. Next slide, please. The work program, as I noted, reflects these themes, whether it be through Housing Now approvals that were taken through last year, focusing on advancing inclusionary zoning, how we move around the city, attention from our transportation planning group, for example, on the surface rapid transit network, something new and important, thinking about how we can move quickly and safely all our vulnerable populations around the city to places of work. Investing in neighborhoods, something that every councillor is very much aware of, and thinking about people and their daily lives. In 2020, large new planning frameworks, something like the Golden Mile, where 50,000 people may live in the future, or a large revitalization of a site like Mr. Christie's in the West End, or something that you're maybe more familiar with, looking at our avenues and our historic main streets. West Queen West comes to mind as something where we brought to a conclusion in 2020. Tackling climate change, very much infused throughout everything that we do. Climate action, I think we like to say, whether it be working with heritage buildings, which inherently is building in resilience to what we do, but also more directly for 2021, we're forecasting report and update on the green development standards and our activities around green roofs, which has been very successful over the years. I mentioned already responding to provincial legislation. We're forecasting how much effort we have to put into that in the coming year and a half or so. And other initiatives, other city building initiatives that underpin a lot of the work they do, whether it be the employment survey, very, very important piece of work that we did do in 2020, all the way through the pandemic, reaching out electronically to employers to find out what was happening on the ground with employment trends. It's something that you can look forward to seeing a report on this spring, and undertaking that survey again in 2021 to have a real-time reflection of what is going on. Another really interesting piece of research, following mobility trends. How are people moving around or not through the course of the pandemic? Something that we're working with U of T on in real time. Next slide, please. The report highlights our completions last year. against our service levels. I'll just point out that our service level typically is around 18, and we, by and large, always exceed our service levels. Slightly below it last year, I think in the context of the reality of the pandemic, adjusting to virtual and digital delivery, being able to recommence e-consultation on studies. There's no doubt that it had an impact on our ability to continue to move things along. It's interesting. I know that through the course of a 4-year cycle of a council term, typically more work tends to build up through consultation and activities and requests and then plays out through the 3rd and 4th year of a term. So we're seeing that trend again. Despite all these challenges, I think a lot of work was accomplished, very close to what we were able to achieve, for example, in 2019. Our forecast for 2021 in the next slide. In the next slide, please. Preliminary forecast is provided in the report. As I emphasize, it is fluid. Things do change based on priorities and our capacity. It does reflect, obviously, a suite of activities that are very much connected to recovery. And as I noted earlier, the pattern of work very much follows a 4-year cycle, if you will. Next slide, please. Just more specifically on our response to Council's request about COVID and what does it all mean when we think about the future of the city. The city manager's report dipped into this. The city manager's response to the TOR report dipped into this, certainly acknowledging that building back in a different, more responsive manner means learning from the past. I won't read the quote, but the reorienting our view in many different ways to emphasize the perhaps what has always been understood as the city's challenges. In the next slide, you'll see that we feel continuing to use a complete community lens is really a useful planning, framing approach for tackling the challenges of COVID. We know and we have heard and discussed, certainly Council has discussed the disproportionate impacts of COVID on racialized and equity-seeking communities. The inequalities that existed have been deepened and accentuated. The way that we can bring planning frameworks forward to address these issues head on is something that we're committed to do in a more deliberate and targeted fashion. And applying a complete community approach, whether it's addressing a longstanding concern about the lack of a community center, whether it's looking at the negative impacts of gentrification in areas that are changing and the dehousing that may be happening as an indirect impact. There are many different ways to bring an approach through a complete community lens to these challenges. Specific trends, I would just offer that, and I know that Mike Williams, before he left, was talking about how much it's too early to tell, but I think some of the responses that we're certainly aware of that we will need to focus on as we undertake planning frameworks and other activities this year include our understanding of what's happening with the work from home trend. Not everybody, about 2/3 of people from a StatsCan point of view in Canada can't or don't work from home. I think we have to remember that a lot of people are still going to places of employment across the city and traveling. That is something that we're monitoring, as I indicated. So what are those travel impacts? What are those takeaways from COVID on that? And what's going on with our main streets. A lot of concern about that. The trends in housing, a real 50-year, I noticed yesterday in the media, 50-year high in terms of the rental vacancy rate. So what's that all about, and how quickly might that recover, and the impacts on our housing strategies? The importance of public space, been made very clear, and our emphasis on the public realm that I think we've traditionally emphasized, but again, accentuating our understanding of what the importance of public space is about. Finally, this whole issue of, and many people are calling it different things, but whether you want to call it the 15-minute city or mixed use, or I like to call it just living and working locally, how much our planning can respond to that desirable, I think, framework where people can move around less, and maybe they can eliminate a commute on occasion. Maybe they can get all their services in their local communities. They can go about their daily life cycle depending on their age and their ability and their income. How can we set up planning for success to make that work more and more? Again, a big takeaway, I think, from COVID. Next slide, please. Working with partners, again, how this manifests itself through a COVID lens is remembering that there are the physical aspects of planning, but working with partners on community development, whether that's with SDFA, economic development, other partners, and not just partners from the city, but from our communities to address the historic unevenness in some of these communities. And just two very quick examples here that we're emphasizing in 2021 in Little Jamaica and Jane Finch, where we need to align our work with the work of other divisions to advance our response to historic socioeconomic inequalities. Next slide, please. So with that, I'll conclude my remarks. Sorry for the length of that, but I think it's important to convey the width and breadth of our work program and the work of the City Planning Division and our partners. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. We'll now go to our speaker, and then we'll come back to questions of staff. Jeff Cattell, can you hear us? Good morning, Jeff.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I would like to say what was a very great presentation from Greg Linton there. We're representing Kathy McDonald and myself are here to represent the Federation of North Toronto Resident Associations, which is an umbrella organization of over 30 resident associations in Midtown, North Toronto, and North York. We understand the importance of a vital and active planning function, the kind of work, really critically important work that Greg has been talking about, and the themes there, the complete community, cohesiveness of the city, working together, recovery and rebuild. This is really, really important work. We think that the city should be investing more on this kind of work. We've got a couple of recommendations that I noticed that Planning and Housing is supposed to receive this report, but frankly, this is an extremely important report. It's not just something to receive, it's something to move forward on the basis of. And so we're bringing forward a couple of recommendations, which we'll come back to, that City Council approve additional resources in the 2021 Toronto budget for City Planning Division study work program. And secondly, that City Planning Division ensure that studies, plans, and guidelines directed to protection of neighborhood character, like HCDs, CHRAs, and neighborhood guidelines are prioritized. So as Greg discussed, the City Planning Divisions are basically consist of two main streams, the study work program and development review. The study work program, which includes such things as avenue studies, secondary plans, zoning bylaw updates, heritage conservation district studies, community heritage resource assessments, and neighborhood specific or citywide broad guidelines. They're really critical in advancing the city's strategic priorities and also strengthening the position of the city to deal with the development applications coming in the door. It's also vital, frankly, in dealing with a provincial government that does not respect the authority and jurisdiction of the city, and is coming out of left field with a lot of initiatives which are overreaching into the city, as we know. The development of secondary plans that take transportation and other required infrastructure needs into account, along with parkland, public realm, schools, all this kind of stuff, they're really critical. It's important to get ahead of development applications. And that's was demonstrated, for example, in the Midtown, OPA 405, and the downtown, OPA 406. However, we've taken a look at tried to array the 2020 and the 2021, and it's very obvious that the waiting list for studies and plans is long and getting longer. The trend appears to be especially true for studies which would protect established neighborhoods, including HCD studies and CHRAs and guidelines, such as the neighborhood design guidelines. The chart which I have we've attached to our letter indicates that while there were a couple of additions to the list in 2021, for example, Jane Finch, several studies have fallen back from active in 2020 to just hold in 2021. For example, Elm Street, Fort York, Sunshine Valley, and multiple studies continue to be on hold. For example, Lawrence Park West, HCD, and the Leaside CHRA, which were authorized as HCD studies back in 2014. So they've been sitting there for 5 years. Meanwhile, the Neighborhood Design Guidelines template project, which commenced in 2016, is now downgraded from forecast to hold. This is especially concerning as of the two pilot areas, Long Branch and Willowdale, which were chosen for studies back then, only one, Long Branch, was completed. And it appears now that the project is effectively abandoned. This is important stuff. It would have provided a template to be used right across the city. The result of this inaction on these projects is that established neighborhoods like Leaside, Lawrence Park, Summerhill, Ramsden Park, just to name four, are left without policies and tools to protect their built form. Every 2 weeks, the C of A, in failing to take neighborhood character into consideration, allows projects that do not fit the established character of the community. And things get, and even if they are refused, they go to the TLAB, which has the same lack of interest in neighborhood protection and character. The risk is that eventually, when the policies and guidelines are at last in place, it may have become difficult to demonstrate the prevalence of the character that drove the need for protection in the first place. In addition, it remains to be seen whether the new expanding housing options in neighborhoods projects present additional threats to the character of established neighborhoods. Meanwhile, city planning is facing the biggest threat to its ability to manage development applications with the legislative changes for planning and heritage under Bill 108 and Bill 138. This will disrupt city planning's agenda in ways of which at this point we are not yet fully aware. Meeting compressed processing deadlines for regular
Jeff,
applications.
I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up. You're well over the 5 minutes.
Or Kathy McDonald is part of this team as well. Do you want her to continue?
We don't have anyone else registered. We just have you registered.
Kathy McDonald is registered.
Okay, go
Anyway,
ahead. We don't have her registered, just for the record, Jeff. Go ahead.
Well, I was taught, she told me she was registered, so I don't know. Anyway, I will wrap up. We believe that despite, or even because of, the extraordinary fiscal challenges facing the city, these issues need to be addressed at a citywide level, recognizing the strategic importance of city planning with increases to the city planning budget, and also at the divisional level by ensuring that resources be made available for the protection of neighborhoods. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on this great work.
Thank you. Are there any questions of the speaker? Seeing none, thanks for joining us today, Jeff. That concludes our list of speakers for this item. Questions of staff?
Sorry, is Kathy not speaking, Madam Chair?
Okay, staff is just asking me to see if Kathy McDonald is still on the line to speak. I believe Jeff spoke on behalf of the two.
Yes.
Kathy, are you speaking, or did Jeff presented both presentations?
Yeah, I was planning to speak.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so thank you for the opportunity to speak today. To sort of further comment on this item. Greg Lintern's presentation really outlines critical priorities for planning in the upcoming year. And so there's so many different aspects to address related to the COVID response and other items. And these need a really strong planning support. So just to reiterate that we're really concerned with the reductions in the budget for planning studies and the importance of these studies and so that council can make the right decisions in going forward. Planning studies are not costly, but the impacts of not doing things properly certainly are. And we strongly support the recommendations to sort of increase the planning budget as needed to accomplish this. That's sort of the comments I'd like to make at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Any questions of the speaker? Seeing none, thanks for joining us today. And that concludes our list of speakers. Questions of staff, Councillor Perks.
Thank you. To the Chief Planner, I've only had a little bit of time to review the work plan in terms of studies, and it looks to me like a number of studies that were expected to be conducted this year have either been put on hold or just simply aren't listed. I'm thinking of the Junction Heritage Review Phase 1 and the Chinatown study. Is there a list of everything that we had expected but isn't appearing?
Through the Deputy Mayor, Councillor, the appendices in the report, as I outlined in the presentation, just give a snapshot of, basically end of year where we were with studies in the context of council requested studies, as you noted, and other work, some of which are on hold, and they may be paused. They may be suffering from a lack of staff. There may be other issues that have been taken up as priorities. So, for example, last year we put a lot of emphasis on catching up our heritage individual designations that were aligned with various planning studies. You'll recall just at the end of the year we did 1,000, just under 1,000 listings.
I don't want to use up all my time.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. This list is complete then? Because I kept function.
Yeah, it's complete to the best of our ability, and certainly this is why it's a live list. If councillors have specific questions, we can certainly follow up on anything specific.
Now, when you were describing all of that, you gave some examples of extra work that has moved resources. I want to make sure that council is being careful about this. You mentioned modular housing. My memory is when we approved the modular housing work, first at this committee and then at council, we approved extra budget for you. Didn't we do that?
I mean, my comment may have been in terms of more of a general comment around putting priority on making sure that we got it done.
Yeah.
So if a planner, and just specifically,
So
and
no,
I made
I
the,
just need to understand, when we're giving modular housing or
Yeah.
open door or something like that, I want to make sure that
Yeah.
we're being mindful in giving you the resources to do it, not just saying, go cancel something else at your discretion. Has that
Right.
been our practice?
no, generally speaking, we try to absorb the new assignments within our budget and within our complement. I'll say that for 2021, for example, because we're ramping up housing now, we have asked for more staff to advance housing now specifically. And we reallocated some resources internally to make sure that we made progress on housing now in 2020.
So we are sometimes creating work for you and forcing you to reallocate without giving you sufficient budget.
I
just
think
need to
that's an
understand.
inevitable consequence of the myriad of requests that we get.
Oh, it's not inevitable. We could always give you a budget if we're asking you to do things. Next, I wanted to, I just been quickly over the weekend looking at some of the budget documents related to your capacity to deliver work. And the analyst note suggests to me that in 2020, you underspent on staff by $3 million because of the hiring slowdown, 400,000 because of the voluntary separation, and you're projecting another 800,000 because of voluntary separation. So that's sort of like $4.25 million reduction in your staffing budget for 2021. Am I reading that right? We're like, that's a lot of planners.
Yeah, so through the speaker, our complement is the same, off by one between 2020 and 2021. The full complement, which we never operate at, by the way, 450 to 451 projected for 2021. The impacts that you identified there, both from last year and projected this year, are generally correct, but the complement is the same. The savings is coming from no increase to non-unionized staff salaries, VSP savings, and hiring slowdown that took place in 2020. We're in the
So we caught
program.
up on all the hiring slowdown. I'm going to need a second round, Madam Chair. I realize
Okay.
I'm at my 5 minutes.
Sorry about the length of my answers.
Go, hello? Oh, I lost everybody. Oh, everybody's back. Okay, Councillor Perks, I didn't hear what you said last.
I'm going to need a second round.
Okay. Councillor Nunziata?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, to Greg, in your year in review, 2020 completions and approvals, you mentioned that you completed 58 items, of which 37 have been approved. Do you have a breakdown on the districts of the applications that have been approved?
Well, this, through the chair, this report is about the work program items, not the development applications, but I can give you some information offline if you want that we've been assembling because I know that you mentioned this in our budget review, Councillor, about the applications across the city by district and by ward. Generally speaking, in your ward, Councillor, and in the district, the West District, Etobicoke York, just under 20% of the applications that we receive are in Etobicoke York. And in looking, and again, I'm happy to provide this offline, but in looking at your ward over the last couple of years, citywide, your ward receives 2, 3, or 4% of the applications citywide. In 2020, Councillor, and this is all application types, your ward, I believe, had approvals for 8 of the 10 applications that were received. But again, I'm happy to provide more specific information to you offline.
Yeah, I would like to see a breakdown on the districts, on the ones that have been approved. Now, the inclusionary zoning, when will that be coming forward in 2021, the report?
The report on inclusionary zoning, and I know that Carrie Vombakis is on the call if she wants to weigh in, but I believe we're in the middle of doing more analysis because of the projected impact of the Community Benefits Authority that the new legislation has put in place. So that's underway. We're doing some more consultations. So I believe it's before the summer that we're hoping to be back to Planning and Housing Committee on it.
Yes, through the chair, it's Carrie speaking. I can add to that. We've recently amended the purchase order for additional work to be undertaken by the consultant, reflective of the changes that came through as a result of the CBC. We're targeting having the report back in the first half of 2021. So before the summer break is our intention. The earlier, the better. But the other key piece that we're working on is the implementation component of it, which is, and for consultations with the development industry, is critical. So we want to bring back a complete package, both of the policy, but also of the implementation framework, Councillor.
Okay, thank you for that. Now on the planning study, a number of studies have been put on hold. And just a question on the Weston Village planning study, which a motion was approved 3 years ago on that study, and as well with Mount Dennis. Now, as you know, with Mount Dennis, it took 2 years to hire a consultant, and we just started the study now, even though we requested it 3 years ago. So my concern is that you put the Weston study on hold, and you just mentioned that it may be pause in areas on the number of planning applications, but in an area, for example, Weston, where we have a number of planning applications. As you know, we have a Go and an Up Express at Weston Lawrence. And you put the planning study on hold. How are we to proceed with these planning applications if you've put this particular study on hold in light of the number of planning applications that have come forward to the city?
Thank you for the question through the Deputy Mayor. That situation is not unheard of across the city, and it is something that we have to apply our judgment to and understand the exact dynamics of the situation. I believe, we are advancing our review of a specific application that's affected by what you're talking about in Weston. I know that the original report from staff indicated that we needed to do that study, but we also have legislative requirements to meet with respect to that application, so we have to bring that forward. We'll take a look at the context and do as much as we can to inform our review of that application. And I'm mindful of what you outlined, Councillor, in terms of the need to get that Weston study going. But we have prioritized Mount Dennis and the work to the south along the rail line where there are new stations projected. And yes. My undertaking is that we will get to Weston, but it will not, the absence of that study won't prevent us from reaching a conclusion about that application. And as I said, that happens across the city, and we have to apply some judgment on the specific circumstances to address our legislative requirements.
So on the individual applications that have been submitted in,
last question, Councillor.
Weston is 50 zoning. I mean, it hasn't been rezoned since 1950. That each application that comes in Weston, even though the planning study probably won't start for years down the road, that we will be dealing with the individual applications separately in light of the present zoning. Correct? Is that what you're saying?
We'll have to do a focus review of understanding the context, of course, like we would do with any application. But as I said, we have legislative timelines to meet on the review of that application, and we're going to have to undertake that review.
It's not just one application.
Councillor, that was your last question. I'll do a second round if people need it.
There's several more.
Okay.
Thank you.
Next, are there any other councillors with questions? No, seeing none. Councillor Perks, you had asked for a little bit more time.
Sure, yes, thank you. And Greg, apologies if this sounds like I'm badgering you. I'm really not. I'm trying to understand.
No, it's fine.
So in your last answer to me, just to refresh where we were, you told me that your staffing complement is the same as where you had been before COVID. You're back to that level. Did I understand that correctly?
My approved complement, my staffing level is not back yet because of the VSP and the hiring slowdown. So we're aggressively in a hiring phase, but we do have historic vacancy rate that we're getting through.
Right. But so the proposed complement for 2021 will put you back to where your complement was at the beginning of 2020?
Yes, 450 2020, 451 in 2021.
And here's where I get lost. I have a clear memory for projects like Housing Now and some of the other more detailed citywide planning work that we've asked of you to accelerate things, that we gave you additional complement. So why is the number staying the same and not growing?
Maybe Carrie wants to weigh in because your question is specifically about what we've been dealt with, what we're dealing with on housing. Carrie?
Right. I just want to make sure, all I'm trying to get to here is I don't want to feel like as council, we're coming along and saying, hey, planning, we have this great idea, Housing Now or whatever else it might be, and it's going to need 10 more staff. And we approve money to give you more staff, but then we don't actually really give it to you. I just want to make sure we're not doing that.
I understand that, and Carrie can speak to it specifically, but I want to be clear that when we have a complement of 450, pick a number, we never operate at that complement, never.
That's a separate problem, and I'll address that separately. I just want to make sure that we're increasing what's it, complement, not, strength is hiring, but we're increasing complement when we give you extra jobs.
That's true, but if we were able to operate closer to complement, our performance would be higher. We'd be able to do more of what you asked us to do.
There are two distinct issues.
Yes.
Tell me if I'm wrong. I believe there are two distinct issues. One issue is how fast we're able to get bodies into seats to do jobs.
Keep them in seats.
Yeah. And the second is, are we giving you additional complement when we approve budget to give you additional tasks?
Okay, I understand your questions. Carrie, do you want to weigh in on the second part?
Yeah. Through the Deputy Mayor to Councillor Perks. Councillor, Housing Now, when the program was first initiated through the Housing Secretariat, we did request additional staff. That additional staff was approved on a temporary basis. So we have funding for staff till 2023. In terms of the new Housing Now ask the council has approved, there is a report from the Housing Secretariat that will be going forward in order to advance these new applications within the condensed timeline. The Housing Secretariat has put in additional temporary staffing resources for city planning. So that the Housing Now program is being addressed that way. In terms of now, to your point, and to Greg's point, it takes a while for us to be able to fill those positions. And in terms of Housing Now, we actually have vacancies right now because of the staffing churn.
But again, Carrie, I appreciate your answer, and we can deal with how quickly the city's system for hiring or training or promoting people into those roles works as one question. I'm reviewing the budget documents and I don't see additional temporary or permanent positions related to Housing Now. I'm getting an answer from Greg saying that the approved complement is the same.
That was your last question, Councillor.
There are some minor adjustments, positions that have been where the projects were finished. There was a transit position and some other minor tweaks, Councillor Perks. And so there was a net change of 1. We added 4 and took away 3 or whatever. So that's how we ended up between 450 and 451. I can take you through that specifically with the actual positions, if you like.
Thank you. I think we're going to have to do that. Thank you very much. This has been quite helpful.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillors with questions? Can I have my screen back with councillors? Any other questions? Seeing none, I do have questions, and I mean, I understand we're not on budget, but I think Councillor Perks has, you know, there is a correlation obviously between staff and delivering the program that we have in front of us. So I think it is important to understand this. I just want to make sure I understood correctly, because I was also a little bit confused, because I did see in the budget documents there is a request for 4 extra staff for Housing Now, specifically just for planning. So what you're saying is when there's project-specific staff like Housing Now, what happened this year is that you had other projects that came to an end, and so when you add it all up, that's why your complement is only up by 1. Is that correct? So you actually, there were projects that came to an end, that staff is no longer working on that project, but now you have added 4, for example, for Housing Now. So when you add everything up, you're up 1. Is that it?
That's correct.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I understood correctly. Okay. Seeing no more questions, speakers? Are there any speakers on this item? I will, I think Councillor Fillion sent a communication. Oh, Councillor Perks. So I do understand that Councillor Perks has motions on this item, but he stepped out. Okay, he's back. It seems like he's back. Councillor Perks.
Sorry, someone was at the door. The virtual meetings, eh? So I have 2 motions. I don't know if the clerk has both of them. One, Councillor Layton submitted.
Councillor, I understand you have 3 motions.
Oh, 3, okay. Look at that. I'm way more productive than I thought I was. Okay, so the first motion, and this one's on behalf of Councillor Layton, requests the Chief Planner, Executive Director, City Planning to prepare a budget briefing note to the Budget Committee presenting backlog of planning and heritage report requests and necessary resources that would be required from the appropriate reserve fund to address the backlog of planning and heritage reports requested, and provide scenarios for completing the backlog of requests within 3 years and within 5 years. That's my first motion. Second is request the Chief Planner, Executive Director, City Planning to initiate a focused review of the North York Secondary Plan and provide recommendations as an outcome of this work on the maximum densities that may be included in the secondary plan, the work program for the study to be undertaken in consultation with the Ward Councillor. That's on behalf of Councillor Fillion. And the third is to request the Chief Planner and Executive Director of City Planning to provide a briefing note to the Budget Committee on all current planned and 2020 budgeted staffing levels, including all council-approved positions for special projects such as Housing Now. And that third motion speaks to the line of questioning. I'm sorry if it's a little bit awkwardly worded. I'm trying to do it on the fly here, but I think the intention is clear. So we are in remarkable circumstances. We have, obviously all of the extraordinary cost pressures associated with the pandemic. And, I can remember not long ago talking to a city planner who had been reassigned to go work in the shelter system at the beginning of the pandemic emergency. And while all this is going on, the development applications keep coming in. While I appreciate that at the beginning of the pandemic, we had to move heaven and earth to be able to manage all of the crisis problems that were suddenly dumped in our lap. But we've had a year now. And in that year, we've had an opportunity to start to settle things down, start to hire staff up in those areas where there are new demands, and bring staff back to what they were doing. We also are facing, as the city manager made very clear, an $856 million shortfall. And what we were told in the launch of the budget is that we were going to maintain service levels and ask for the $856 million. But if we didn't get it, we would deal with it by deferring some capital work. My concern is that we're not only doing that, but we're actually reducing the city's capacity to deliver urgent services, such as managing the flood of development applications. You know, as the chief planner reminds us all the time, Toronto is one of the hottest development areas on the continent and is going through one of the biggest booms in its history. And we simply can't let that work vanish. So I need to understand, before I vote on giving the chief planner the staff that he says he needs in order to deliver this work plan, that it actually is enough and that we're not simply deferring work in some kind of austerity scenario in order to make ends meet and to make it appear that we're able to come through without any service cuts. I need to know that before I vote on the budget. I would like to know that before I vote on this work plan, but I don't have the necessary documentation in front of me. I'm deeply concerned that the work plan shows so many things being put on hold. I would have expected, given the development pressures facing the city, that we would have had a report saying we can't stay ahead of it and do good city planning with the complement we have. And I want to investigate that question. I want to make one final note. Because the budget season is so truncated now, it's half the amount of time it was 2 years ago. And because the budget documents that we get are so much thinner than they were 2 years ago, I'm not in a position where I can go and meaningfully work through these problems at the budget committee. I get 2 days and a total of 5 weeks instead of 8 or 10. So as we did at Toronto East York Community Council, and 1, 2, 3, 4 of us voted for it there, we voted to have something go directly from Community Council to the Budget Committee because there is no intervening council meeting where we can organize that work. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other speakers on this item?
I just have a question of the mover, if I may, Madam Chair.
Councillor Bradford.
And recognizing it's about the second motion, I don't know if we can put that on the screen.
This is Councillor Fillion's motion?
Yeah, so this is just sort of a question for our committee. Is this directing, getting the motion up there. Does this change the work plan or the prioritization of the work plan in any way? I guess what I wouldn't want to see is us coming here and, there's lots of focus work that needs to take place in many of our neighborhoods across the city, and I wouldn't want to start putting things on the top of the pile with motions. I'd like to leave that to staff to determine when and where they need to direct the resources and do the study work.
So there's two thoughts on that. The first is at every single Planning and Housing Committee meeting that I can recall, we approve directions to staff to do work. We do it all the time, right? So, when we approved Housing Now, we said, go do some additional work. We typically try to organize getting the resources that we need when we give those directions. Because, we're in the middle of the budget and everything's on a hurry up basis, I'm not able today to say what those resources are. And that's why the third motion that I've moved, the complimentary briefing note, gives staff an opportunity to tell us, if you want us to do this additional work, we will need additional resources.
Yeah, I'm fine with the motions. This is more, and respectfully, we don't just grab work ideas out of air, like Housing Now. These things are.
Or say doing a planning study in East York on how to get more missing middle housing. Yeah, councillors all the time think up stuff that they think is important. And if council votes as a body to say it's important, then that work has to get done. We're the governing body.
I understand that, Councillor. I'm just saying that, you know, if you're talking about housing now, or if you're talking about expanding housing options, like there is a direct report with that. Here is the work program. And it seems like in this instance, we're looking at a particular part of the city, and we're saying do that work and prioritize doing that work now. I don't know.
As we did in your ward for the missing middle. Absolutely, yes.
That
was by motion. That was by motion of a member of council.
Okay.
And the majority of council agreed with you. I agreed with you.
Sure.
So we do this all the time. We're elected to do this work. And you know, if you think that what Councillor Fillion has asked me to move here isn't a priority, don't vote for it.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the patronizing tone. Just asking a question.
I'm not patronizing. I'm reminding you that this is what we
I think we've cleared it out, and
time.
maybe I can be of assistance just for the committee. I understand that Councillor Fillion has consulted with staff, and actually staff is supportive of the motion. So I thought it would be important to share this and just to give this piece of information to everybody as they make up their mind to vote. Any other questions of the mover? No? Any other speakers? Seeing none, I would just like to make some remarks on, first of all, thank the planning team, because in a very, very challenging year, as we saw through the presentation that Greg gave, we were basically able to do the same amount of work that we did the year before. Same studies, same pressures, and they did deliver with all the changes, the challenges of adapting to work from home, all the challenges that all the families are going through with working from home, the challenges of, you know, what is very much teamwork to be working from home. They did deliver on many of the studies that we had planned for last year. So I do want to express the gratitude to the whole team for the work that was done in 2020. There is an incredible amount of work for 2021. I think every councillor is always anxious to get their studies done, to get their development applications approved or denied in that case, but reviewed mainly. And I think it is important to ensure that we have the resources to fulfill that mandate. I do think that, as our chief planner says many times, the city is growing very fast. I think that we have a real opportunity to catch up a little bit here in the next few years. And I think that there is a lot of pressure that is coming to certain neighborhoods that we need to ensure that we're planning ahead. And that we're planning ahead to ensure that we have the complete communities. I think the complete communities, without the appropriate studies, appropriate planning done in advance of some of this development pressure, is very, very, very hard to obtain. And so bringing together the work that other divisions has done and putting these plans in place is extremely important. And I know that many share that those concerns. So happy to see the planning moving forward. And through the budget process, I am sure that we'll have the opportunity to ensure that you have the resources for these programs and for programs like Housing Now that has been, for example, brought up here several times. And it is a budget request that different departments have for extra staff, because it's a program that we're scaling up. If we're scaling up these programs, it is important that we give our teams the resources to truly scale it up. So with that, I will move the report, and so we'll have a vote on Councillor Perk's motions. First motion, all those in favor? Just give me a second, because I can't see councillors. Okay, great, that carries. Second motion on behalf of Councillor Fillion, all those in favor? That carries. And third motion, all those in favor? And that carries. That's it? Okay. And with that, we can move to the third item on the agenda, which is expanding housing options in neighborhoods, beaches, East York pilot project. We have a a public speaker on this item, Philip Kochev. Philip, can you hear me? Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you.
Go ahead. You have 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members for hearing me today. Some of you I know I've spoken with about my passion for the missing middle, the challenges that I've experienced in trying to create these kind of homes in our city, and how I feel that embracing the missing middle would be one of the ways to help Toronto's housing crisis. To give you some context, I have had 3 experiences building missing middle housing in our city. The first was a duplex I created about 15 years ago, which was relatively straightforward, but still required a committee of adjustment. And at the time, I had wanted to create a triplex, but couldn't because of the development fee costs. 6 years ago, I did create a triplex, which is the house that my partner Andrew and I currently live in. This time we had to appeal up to the Ontario Municipal Board as the city is the one who challenged our proposal. And a few weeks ago, we began construction on a fourplex where the main purpose of the house is to house Andrew's parents. This home has been designed with Andrew's mom's mobility needs in mind, and given the price of housing in our city, we were challenged to find a space that met their needs for the value of the home that they would be selling in Newmarket. And any rentals that were not in tall towers or had decent indoor and outdoor space would easily be in the $4,000 to $5,000 a month or so range. And I mention this because one of the goals of Missing Middle is to create affordable housing, but we also need to be open to variations of what affordable means. And in this fourplex project, it will give Andrew's parents an incredible new home to enjoy the lifestyle that they deserve at a reasonable cost. I've experienced a number of barriers to making missing middle housing in our city. Building costs are much higher since you aren't getting the economy of scale like a high-rise building. Lack of planning bylaws that support missing middle housing, and actually bylaws become more restrictive for converted houses than they are of single-family dwellings. Misconceptions from neighbors that missing middle housing will have a negative effect on their neighborhood, when actually, if done properly, the opposite can happen. And most importantly, all of the city fees, as missing middle housing is charged the same way as large developments. In our recent experience, we were shocked at how high the committee of adjustment fees, the park levies, and development fees had become, which originally came in at over $180,000, or approximately 20% of our proposed construction budget. Until some of these barriers are addressed, you just won't see a lot of missing middle housing built, other than from people like Andrew and I who are doing it as a passion project or for personal use. And yet I truly believe that embracing missing middle and alternative forms of housing like garden and laneway suites will contribute to help solve our housing crisis. In my role as a real estate broker and managing partner, I see the challenges people are having to try and rent or buy in our city. Young people can't get into the market, and those retiring don't have many options if they are selling their multi-level homes. Instead, many are moving out of the city, and we saw this more than ever this past year. Toronto desperately needs more housing and more diverse forms of housing if we are to be a world-class and livable city. Cookie-cutter condo towers and multi-million-dollar single-family homes just aren't cutting it, and we need the middle. In short, we can only start to address missing middle housing once the city is behind the concept and makes changes to both the planning bylaws and associated fees to encourage and not disincentivize people from creating this housing form. As such, I think it's a great idea that city-owned property be used for the Beaches East York pilot project, as it will allow the city to oversee the project and propose an ideal model that achieves the missing middle goal and takes into account some of the concerns that are expressed. It will be an educational method to show missing middle can work and will allow the city to see firsthand the challenges faced by those creating this kind of housing and appreciate the changes that will truly be needed if we want to support and encourage missing middle creation. With that, I would encourage the committee to support this request, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Philip. Councillor Fletcher, questions of the Speaker.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Philip, for coming along, and I see your place regularly. It looks great. Your
Thank you.
experience actually is already a pilot. You've articulated so many little hurdles that you've had to overcome, and focusing on whether or not the current way we're dealing with missing middle creates barriers that are very difficult to overcome. And I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind putting those in a more formal fashion that we can introduce into the pilot to be watched, and that we take your situation and that of others who are creating this type of housing to really look at what are some of the shifts and changes that we would need to make to be successful. Would you be prepared to delineate that very clearly for staff and
Yeah,
for us,
thank you,
please?
Councillor Fletcher. Actually, I think it was back in February. I had sent quite a detailed email, exactly what you're asking to Greg Lintern's office. It was just before the shutdown of COVID, and I do remember getting a response back. So I actually had that easily available that I could forward on, where I did note some very specific bylaws that easily could be changed. And I'm not talking about, totally allowing massive development in neighborhoods, but some very reasonable tweaks to our current bylaws, which are quite old and antiquated. They were developed for a very different time. And, when you think about it, there's very little that people can do in their properties without having to go to committee already. So yeah, I'd be happy to repackage that and share that.
Yes, in light, if you don't mind me sharing that with all of the councillors on this committee, but in light of this being a goal, then what are the biggest hurdles to being successful without creating a situation of overdevelopment? And we all understand you don't want 8-story building there. You want to gradually and gracefully intensify your property, and you've really persevered. So thank you. You're a great example.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you. Any other questions of the speaker? Seeing none, thanks for joining us today, Philip. Questions of staff? Seeing none, speakers?
I'm going to ask Greg Lintern, since Philip said he'd sent that in, and he has. This is. I know we're having a pilot, and we're going to use city land, so it's going to be a little different. But I'm sure that Mr. Cook, if he sent this to you, he is he's kind of a pilot, because he is an engaged, persevering young man who's decided to do this, and his journey is worth looking at, because outside of doing an actual pilot, he's now showing us what some of those hurdles are that make it extremely difficult to achieve. Do you have you got his correspondence as part of your thinking, or how can we take his experience and make it more, have a review of that, and then ensure that it's part of the pilot or the learnings of a pilot?
Thank you for your question, Councilor Fletcher. Through the Deputy Mayor, this is very much brings to mind I'll say the boutique, even though I don't like to use that word, but almost the do-it-yourself world of small infill in Toronto. And the motivations that people have behind this are fascinating, a fascinating part of this story, because they're often thinking about intergenerational living. Do I have a place for my parents to live? Do I have a place for my kids to live? And that's what we're seeing more and more about this conversation. It's a conversation about people and their experiences. So what we want to do with this pilot for sure is tap into that kind of smaller interest focus. We've had a lot of contact with these types of situations and people behind these interests, And we're going to set up that conversation to make sure that we hear and get the participation of these smaller stakeholders. You can imagine with social media and the contact that we have these days, it's almost easy to tap into a big conversation with the smaller scale interests, and very much fits with the direction that we're going in, and testing some of these concepts, understanding it through demonstration projects, whether they be through private experiences or our experience with a pilot, so we can better connect the ideas, the way the money works, options for affordability, options for resilience. These are all really important attributes.
However, some of the challenges that I'm sure there's, you must have a list or a way to find out who's undertaken these types of projects and what they're finding are the key hurdles, rather than do a pilot and start at zero. So I'm finding, and I'm hearing from you, that there's a fair amount of experience already.
Yes.
That needs to be seen as part of a pilot. That the pilot might be geographically centered in one place and finding a piece of city property, but the pilot in essence is the experience of everyone who's trying to achieve this. And we're not talking about Cadillac Fairview, we're talking about the Philip Kosevs and others who are trying to achieve a missing middle experience. So how are you going to weave that in? That's my first question. Secondly is, what role is Create TO playing in this project?
For your first question, we are going to weave it in. We've already started to outreach to small development and builders in the area and across the city that we're hearing from. So it's very much a stakeholder engagement that will be specific to people who have experience or aspirations in this area. And we saw the same thing happen with Laneway Suites. The second part of your question around Create TO, we're working directly with both city real estate and Create TO to find city-owned sites, to undertake due diligence, to do some modeling, to understand the pro forma behind these opportunities. So we're already tapped into Create TO and city real estate to advance the investigation of opportunity sites and take it through a process.
So I don't have a motion, but I'm very interested in understanding how many of these small sites like Mr. Kosev has that we have had embarked on since the discussion of the missing middle started, understanding how many there are so that they are also part of the platform here. Is that difficult to do? Is that?
No, I mean, we are building an understanding of data all the way through this. I know historically 10 years, over the last 10 years where missing middle housing is already permitted in Toronto in the R districts, we've produced about 2,500 units, net new units. And we have increasingly, we're building up a more specific understanding of examples. Some of them, as you know, are very old. This concept has been around a long time. Some of them are very new. And it's an interesting, what we're really interested in is finding and discussing with the newer what the newer opportunities are and the barriers that people are coming up against to make it happen in a modern context. They look at the old stuff and they say, why can't we do that anymore? And there are new factors, there are new costs, there are new barriers. And that's what we want to get at in order to break down to make sure that we can see some of this happen.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Next up, Councillor Bradford. Questions of staff.
Thanks, Madam Chair. To our Chief Planner, first of all, thanks for all the work on this. Reading the report, we talk about back in March, pre-COVID, last year, we ended up going out and talking to residents directly, door to door, about missing middle projects. How was that consultation and those discussions? How were you able to use that to bring this report forward and inform the work that we're going to be doing?
Through the speaker, you, Councillor Bradford, and just I want to make sure that I've introduced our team on this, who are also on the call, Greg Ewens, Jahani Mahendran, and Banathi Gadahandra. These are important members of our team who are advancing this opportunity on the greater Missing Middle team. Back in March, just before the pandemic hit, we were able to do a door-to-door survey, which is kind of an old-fashioned way of taking the issue to the people, if you will, knocking on doors. What we heard, I think it was about 160 odd people that we were able to get surveys from that day or over that course of that weekend. Was a really great interest in affordability, a really great interest of the people lens, and how people were relating this to finding, in that context back in March, housing opportunities in Toronto, and understanding, having a conversation with people about what it actually means, looking around that neighborhood, understanding that actually there are some examples of missing middle housing already in and around that neighborhood. So tapping into that conversation, whether they be duplexes, small walk-ups, row houses, things like that. So there's a great deal of interest, and I think it kind of underscored the fact that this area and many areas probably in the city are quite interested in this conversation.
Thank you for that. Could you briefly walk us through what we're hoping to achieve with the Missing Middle pilot and the expanding housing options program? And then also, I think, kind of responding to some of the comments from the deputant about the challenges inherent in doing these types of projects, and how this pilot and the study work underway might help to address that.
Yes, and if other members of the team want to jump in, they're definitely invited to do that. This is a demonstration project, so it's a chance for the city to participate in, especially around city objectives, around resilience, around options for affordability. I would say little a affordability or capital A affordability. We can partner with the Housing Secretariat around programs, for example, investigate those options, find out what those financial barriers are. How do the DCs actually work? How do the development charges and parks levies work against or for opportunities? We've heard a lot of commentary on that. So having some actual development experience on the city side with this, and participating with private interests on how to make this happen is all part of demonstrating what we're hearing from people, is that there's an acceptance of some of these ideas, but there are barriers to overcome around the financials, or maybe it's around the approval process, or how the building code actually works. How do we make accessibility actually work? So really drilling into some of these and highlighting some of these issues that are being experienced by private interests gives us a really good lived experience from a city point of view. And it's a good, frankly, it's a good representative piece of geography, because it has a lot of different zoning in that area. So we can maybe try a few sites that have different kinds of zoning and test out how that works.
Okay, I have two more questions, and I'm cognizant of my time. Historically, when we look at the OP, why haven't we seen a greater variety of housing types and forms in some of our neighborhoods? If you go back to 03 Consolidated Official Plan.
Well, very briefly, the official plan is written in a way that reinforces physical character, and that's the policy intent of the official plan. It's stable, it's not static, but it does suggest that neighborhoods remain stable. So looking at that physical character and the physical character attributes of various neighborhoods, some of them are incredibly consistent and don't allow for new building types to be introduced, and the zoning does not allow it. So having an overall policy framework that perhaps, while you stay within the general scale and character of a neighborhood, opens up the possibilities to carve up that box a little differently. Still talking about the same scale, but maybe it's 2, 3, or 4 units instead of 1, is really at the heart of what we have to understand with the official plan. And that's the discussion that you heard with the deputants before, is we're worried about character. I would say, let's focus on keeping the scale, but see what we can carve up inside the box to create more housing opportunities. That's at the heart of this.
So this might be a natural
Last question.
evolution of our, did you say last question?
Yes.
Sorry. Okay, then the last question is, have we used pilot programs before to test and demonstrate new types of planning policy? And would that be helpful in this instance?
I mean, in some respects, Housing Now is an example of it, and modular is an example of it. But I would say we're kind of extending that methodology that maybe we use on bike lanes or some of the public realm improvements that we've made, dealing with improving water. I can think of one in the East End where there's a new parklet that deals with stormwater. So all these are new. This is a new way of actually testing and putting some diligence behind whether or not our policy direction is actually going to work.
Mm-hmm. I was also thinking about the Laneway Suites program as well.
That's another obvious one, for sure.
Okay,
Okay,
thanks. Those are all
any
my
other
questions.
questions of staff from? Okay, just give me a second. Seeing none. Speakers. Councillor Bradford.
I just asked
Councillor
you one
Perks.
question there. Sorry,
Say that
on the
again,
second
Councillor
round.
Fletcher.
I'm asking for one question on the second round.
I'm being very generous today.
I know you are, because we don't have a big agenda.
I am generous every day, but particularly today. Go ahead,
Of
Councillor.
course you are. Just more so today. Of course you are. Just to go back on that point, because I agree with a pilot, but for laneway housing, that wasn't something that was necessarily allowed. House behind a house, don't allow that. Now we do with laneway. Modular was very new. We had to do some different types of things, but it does appear to me that for the missing middle, we already have some experience of the challenges and not just the opportunities, as Councillor Bradford has pointed out, but we do have a pretty clear understanding based on experience of what those challenges are. And so I really want us to honor the work of people in trying to create this, where they've hit the wall 5 or 6 times, and acknowledge that they have persevered through Committee of Adjustment. They've had many, so I'm just asking you, I think it's a little different than the other two, but maybe I'm wrong, Mr. Chief Planner.
Through the chair, my undertaking is absolutely, we will be in touch with the deputant and have been in touch with other small developers and other proponents who they've approached us, we've approached them. That conversation is up and running, and we're very much going to learn from that lived experience as we advance both the demonstration pilot, but our policy development as well.
Thank you. Speakers, Councillor Perks.
Thank you.
And congratulations both city staff and Councillor Bradford for getting this work advanced. It's very important that we have this kind of flexibility to innovate. And much of what I've heard from the community on this missing middle topic and this pilot is stuff I agree with. I want to insert one note of caution though. Often we hear a suggestion that part of the problem is development charges and the associated fees. The implication being that we need to remove these onerous fees in order to make the missing middle go. And I have to confess to some hesitancy around that. The first thing is we have to remember that application fees are cost recovery. This is our way of making sure that if someone is getting a benefit because of work done by City of Toronto staff, i.e. they're getting more dwelling units onto their property, that shouldn't be a public cost. The second thing is that the development charges are, of course, to provide the infrastructure to deal with the additional population. And we do charge them on the same per unit basis as we do for developers, but it's a per unit basis. If you're doing 1 unit, you pay the fee 1 time. If you're doing 100 units, you're paying 100 times. And I think that's reasonable because those infrastructure costs depend on how many people move in. If we are going to decide that there is a social benefit of having this kind of housing constructed, and we think that that benefit is sufficient enough that we should somehow subsidize that investment, let's be explicit about it, not just waive fees, but recognize it's a subsidy, and think about it in terms of how subsidies with public money ought to work. Should we subsidize somebody who is going to go and get, frankly, more wealth or a rental property that generates an income from them? Is that an appropriate use of public money? Or if we're going to do a public subsidy, should we instead be thinking in terms of, well, if there's a public subsidy here, we need the public to be repaid in some way? It's a caution I always throw out about using the money that we collect through taxes to help private individuals increase their wealth. And if thinking this through reveals that relying on private investment in order to solve problems with affordability and affordable housing is very expensive, it might make it clear that public investment directly in the form of social housing is a better and more efficient way to accomplish the affordable housing goals and city design goals that we all talk about. I just want to inject that note of caution. Thank you.
Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you very much, and thank you everybody for this, an interesting conversation, and for Philip to come down. Anybody that wants to see this great project and see that near Coxwell and Dundas. I just want to say something that we learned in a pilot when we did 300 solar thermals. If you recall, the Ontario government forced the Portland's Energy Center, a peaker plant, onto our waterfront and added a huge peaker plant there against the objections of our then Mayor Miller and City Council. And out of that environmental assessment and settlement, we got money for a solar thermal pilot that was run through TAF. And one of the things that we found was there were obstacles to being even able to put solar thermal on the roofs, because at a certain point, that person that wanted to heat the solar thermal had to go to the Committee of Adjustment to get approval to put the angled solar thermal on the roof. So I think it's those kinds of things that I'm looking at from this pilot, and also more importantly to me, the experience of people who've gone before in doing this. What are some of those challenges that we should fix for this type of housing? The same as we fixed it for laneway housing, that you have an as of right for certain things if you're deemed to be this housing. That's the first thing. That's why I think an accumulation of these projects that have been done on private lands, which is very different than having city lands and city staff and everybody poured onto that. We have advocates that have preceded this project, and they have learnings, and I want to know exactly what they are, and if there's patterns, can we fix those? So rather than wait for however long it's going to be to find the right property, however long it's going to be to do all that, which is going to be a long time, and I think that's fine to do it, I would like to isolate those issues early. And I'm not going to move a motion here. I'll probably follow this up at some point. But to me, that's really critical. Is there a pattern? Are there things that can be easily shifted that we can acknowledge when we're coming up to the pilot, and what to do to overcome them? The second is on the city land. I'm assuming that we're going to hear what that is or where that is. And of course, I know Councillor Bradford would support this. We have to make sure that it's not a place that could take even more density than a missing middle density. So we have a lot of private owners that are beavering away on this. We're going to bring a piece of city property forward to look at it. We need to make sure that it can only accommodate that, not anything more. And then this project will begin. But I want to reiterate how important I think it is for in this pilot, because it's a pilot in one ward, but it's a citywide phenomenon, that we are identifying the patterns, the issues, the obstacles that we're finding, or those who are trying to build this are finding. And I don't think people should be able to have all their fees waived, Councillor Perks. But if it's an issue of a foot above because it is a missing middle site and it's been deemed that way by planning, then maybe that isn't at the Committee of Adjustment, because that's exactly what we found with our solar thermal. So I think that is, I think that would be very helpful. And then we should also look at if there's other wards where we have city property. I know Create said, geez, we'd like to do that in your ward, Councillor, because you have more sites than in the beaches, but it's starting there. And maybe if we do find some more sites, we can do more than one and look at again, applying the learnings, the challenges from those folks that have already undertaken this. And I'm assuming that because it's a city site, we wouldn't be looking at all, we may be looking at waiving fees or et cetera, but that we'll learn more about that later. So I think this is quite exciting. I'm glad that Philip came and didn't show us all the pictures, but you can see them. And let's get at it and get the learnings of what these brave folks have done already.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other speakers that like to speak on this item? Councillor Bradford.
Great, thanks, Madam Chair. Very exciting day. I'd like to extend my thanks to the planning team and Create TO for all the work that's gone into shaping the launch here. And a special thanks and acknowledgement to our chief planner, the Beaches East York pilot team, Fontaine, Jenny, Michael Midzi, Greg Ewens, Danny Sad, Chris Helbrecht. There's been a lot of work over the past number of months and important discussions to get us to that point, and that's not lost on me. I think there's no question that you can see right now that the pandemic has definitely shifted how we're living. We're all online at the moment, but despite that upheaval, we still very much have a housing crisis and challenges in this city. And in many cases, that's been exacerbated for a lot of folks over the course of the pandemic. The pressures of supply and affordability still remain and will only be renewed as we begin to recover from the pandemic. Throughout COVID, I've been hearing that there's a growing demand for the in-between housing stock that we've been talking about. And frankly, we just don't have enough of that in the city. There are folks who would like to bring their aging family members to live nearby, in-law suite, or young adult children who have returned home. They're not at school, they're not in res, and would be very happy in a coach house. So this isn't a new issue. It's just what we've seen over the past year is the way it's impacting us is different. Today's deputation was really informative. Community groups, local builders, and families have been trying to launch these types of small-scale projects in Toronto for years. And our bylaws, our financing, the divisional silos, and some of our processes make that very challenging. I was pleased to see in the report, kind of the next step is actually to go out to folks in the community, go out to builders, talk to people through our FPQ process, and learn about what some of those barriers are that make this so challenging. Because in some cases, our own bylaws, our own development approval process, it can make it difficult to achieve our broader city building and policy objectives. There's a disconnect there. When we're talking about project financing, DCs, infrastructure needs, I think that we can explore and look at an evolution where we have a more nuanced approach to the different types of projects that we're seeing. An 80-story tower at Yonge and Bloor might have a different impact, both physically and financially, than a duplex. And, really, if you look at it, there are scenarios where you have a 1-unit house. It's got 6 folks living in it. And you could have a same size building with 3 units and 3 people living in it. And the 3-unit building would pay more DCs. So I just want to be very honest and acknowledge that DCs and park fees impact project viability. They absolutely do, especially at a smaller scale. And I think putting your head in the sand and ignoring this reality does not help us generate more housing options for more people. So I want to be clear about that. And, you know, many folks are familiar with missing middle, certainly on this committee. And it's fundamentally about having more housing options beyond the two extremes that we often see here in Toronto of very tall condo towers and single detached houses. Nothing wrong with those types of housing. We need them, they're important, but the reality is we're not building enough of those options in between. It's something that we've struggled with for decades. And I think with all of the pressures facing folks in Toronto trying to find housing now, we need to find a way to make duplexes, triplexes, 4-story walk-up apartments, and everything in between more prevalent and more affordable. There's just not many options outside of those multi-million-dollar homes or a small starter condo, and that's not sustainable for any city. And you know, we had comments earlier talking about you know, the threats on maintaining status quo, the threats on neighborhood character. You know, I would suggest that the biggest threat facing Toronto right now is not the need to maintain status quo. We've been doing that for a long time. The biggest threat is our inability to move forward and adapt and respond to the challenges facing the city and ensure that we have more housing options for more people. If we want a Toronto of opportunity, we're going to need housing supply and housing affordability for the residents who are here today and the folks we'd like to welcome to our community in the future. So I'm excited about the pilot component. I think that that's very important. I think it makes it real, makes it tangible. It allows us to learn, you know, a boots on the ground sort of perspective and build out a robust policy framework that allows us to bring these types of housing options to more communities across Toronto. It's a very big city. We're going to pilot it in Beaches, East York. We're going to talk to the community. We're going to talk to the industry. And we're going to find a way to do this. We're going to build a new roadmap for Toronto. So very happy to see this report. There's a lot more work in front of us, but this is a key moment in how we move this forward. And I'm grateful for the Planning and Housing Committee's support and certainly moving this forward through council. Thanks again to staff.
Thank you, Councillor Bradford. Any other speakers on the item? Seeing none. I'd like to say a few words. I've often spoken about scenarios in my community where people have approached us with very personal stories, you know, about their families and in-laws, and the social impact that this can have and the personal impact that this can have on people. And to me, it has touched me. To me, it has really sparked an interest in this, and that's why I started looking more and more into this missing middle. Also because, to be honest with you, I've lived in the community that is very often seeing the opposite. We had, you know, 2-3 apartments in every house 30 years ago. The area that I represent, very, very working class. I remember when I first came to Canada, you know, we lived on a second floor. There was 2 other families in the house as well. And that is actually now the opposite is happening. Those apartments are actually turning into single family homes. And I think that people are getting pushed out of our city. A lot of the kids, for example, that live, that grew up within our neighborhoods are saying, we can't afford it. And those are the ones that are looking at their parents' house and looking at some of these spaces and saying, maybe if we could do another apartment, maybe if we could expand this. And so for me, this is absolutely a question of affordability because it does bring a level of affordability. But it's also a question of inclusiveness. If we want to have inclusive communities, if we don't want to continue to be pushing out people, we also have to think about these solutions. We have to think outside of the box and see how we can ensure that the communities that have been there for a long time can continue to be there, that people can continue to rent in our neighborhoods, that people can continue to, you know, look for a second floor apartment in one of our neighborhoods, that these things are easy to happen. And right now, it is easier to tear down and do a huge big mansion than it is to build, a triplex or a fourplex in our city. And I think that's what we're dealing with in here. With regards to the subsidies, I think Councillor Perks brought an important point, but I've actually been thinking about this as well. And I actually think that there's nobody that we subsidize more than single-family homeowners because we protect that zoning, which has a huge impact on the price of housing. We do major investments in our transit around some of these communities, and their investment continues to just going up. So I think we need to take that in consideration as well, that this is a huge subsidy. All this investment, all this protection of this zoning, this is a subsidy as well. We need to look at that as a subsidy as well. So I think it is important that we balance these things out, how we're going to grow our neighborhoods, and keeping that affordability, and to me, ensuring that they're inclusive. I think we need to create these opportunities to have the people that are living there right now continue to live there, to bring their kids and their families, to add apartment and rental opportunities so that people can continue to rent in our neighborhoods, so that we don't have a city of 80-story buildings and then neighborhoods completely protected. That there's mixtures, and I think that it is important, and that's why this pilot is important, for us to understand some of the barriers to this, because there's going to be areas where having just the laneway and the coach houses and the duplex is important. There's other areas that we can even go a little bit more, but I really think we need to start having different kinds of housing options. I would not like to see just high rises and single family homes in our city. I want to have housing options for people, and that's why I think it is this missing middle project. It is so important, and important because it also impacts the affordability of housing, of course, because it impacts the options, but it also creates a lot more inclusive neighborhoods and supportive of our main streets as well. And with that, there's no motions on this item, so I would like to move the report. All those in favor? And that carries. Okay. Item 20.4, proposed review of parking requirements for new development. We have a public speaker on this item, Linda Brett. Linda?
Yes, I'm here. You can hear me?
Yes, we can. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you this morning. My name is Linda Brett, and I'm president of the Bloor Street East Neighborhood Association, acronym BINA, which is an incorporated not-for-profit community association. Our association has primarily condominium corporations as its members, and they vary in age from about 45 years to present day. We have experience in living in residence with varying degrees of parking and participated in working groups for development applications. Thus, we have seen and experienced the shift in demand. We support the staff recommendations and request that its scope include an area of functionality that we do not believe is adequately addressed in the current processes, namely the use and needs of unspecified parking, which is currently designated quote, quote, guest parking. Our specific request is highlighted in bold in our submission before you, and I did send in a letter with an attachment that you should have in your package. That the staff recommendation be amended to request the inclusions of such persons or entities as property managers, reserve fund consultants, and others who are knowledgeable in parking needs for the service providers to a building over the life of the building. And I stress over the life of the building because we keep concentrating on building it and thinking about it for a year or two, but we forget that a building is going to last 40, 100, 150 years, and it has needs. One of the goals of this review is to work towards more affordable housing, and we believe the functionality of a building for its life plan is an important component of affordability and functionality. Our letter and attachment are self-explanatory. However, I'll expand by way of illustration of some of the changes of focus over time. My 20-year-old building, when we have our semi-annual power washing, every one of our cars has to leave the parking lot, has to go and use parking, mostly in the public realm. The building next door, which has tons of guest parking and tons of other parking for its residents, they move a whole floor at a time to guest parking and never have to use the public realm. When we have major projects in a building, we have contractors that come in that may be there for 6 months. They need parking to access their tools and what have you. In addition to that, we may have, say, our monthly fire inspection, and they need parking and access to their tools and what have you. In addition to that, we may have 2 or 3 units under renovation. They require parking. Where are they going to get them if we keep squeezing the guest parking? And if we don't, then we're adding strains to the public realm, because they go to the public realm, and then when they can't access all of these things, they end up adding to costs of maintaining a building over time. I also became aware of another use of guest parking that I acutely became aware of as our needs age and we want to age in place. Our service providers, such as traveling nurses, doctors, and personal support workers, who often need parking with the building and sometimes at a moment's notice. Having the availability of guest parking made it easier and faster for me to obtain those in-home supports. As to the consultants I have identified, most will refuse to provide expert advice on record on a specific development application, as most suppliers of services tender for services to the development community. They do not want to be blackballed. Therefore, we find ourselves going to working group meetings with our hands tied behind our back, knowing the deficiencies, but not being able to access the consultants that we believe can give the expert information. As stated in the letter, we believe that this type of consultation process, they may be willing to give advice because they're not commenting on a specific development application. They're not impacting a developer, and they can provide advice to the planning department in a way that we can't access now. I thank you for allowing me to make this deputation. I welcome any questions, and I hope you'll consider the use of parking, the unspecified parking and what have you, and perhaps look at a designation of service parking in terms of the building during its entire lifespan. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher, questions of the speaker?
Yes, good morning. I'm not familiar from the East End. I'm not familiar with your end of town. I'm just wondering if you have permit parking.
No.
All throughout. You don't have any permit parking.
Well, there's permit parking a little bit around, but in certain areas of downtown, even if there is
I don't mean downtown, I mean in your
In most
neighborhood.
developments in my area, and Councillor Wong Tam can confirm this, they will say that they want to ensure that the people that live in these developments do not access the permit parking, because they are for the single family dwellings around, et cetera, that do not have actual parking.
Yes.
As far as us leaving our building, we have to go and try and access pay and display and or parking that it has timed for 2-hour allowance, or try and find a parking lot nearby that has space for us.
Right. I may have missed where you're from. I think I got that wrong then. I'm sorry. Are you from Toronto Centre?
Yes. I'm in Ward 11, but we span both Ward 11 and Ward 13, and we were previously in University Rosedale.
Oh, okay. I thought for some
Sorry, we're in
reason
University Rosedale.
I thought you were from further west. My apologies. I missed that. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Any other questions of the speaker? Councillor Wong Tam.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you, Linda, for your presentation. With respect to some of the challenges in the area that you live in and the area that you represent on behalf of the residents, would you say that the City of Toronto has been able to enforce the rules around who actually has the right to access on-street parking permits? Because I think your comments stated that oftentimes it is difficult to access permit parking, and the fact that in some buildings that we've underbuilt underground parking. Would you conclude that to be correct?
Not sure that there's buildings that you have underbuilt. built in parking, but I do know you try and exclude the new builds from you being able to use permit parking. Most of the buildings seem to be somewhat overbuilt, but in trying to squeeze in as much as they can, a building of 400 units with 7 guest parking spaces to me is not adequate. What I do find when I walk down the streets is I see the service providers sitting in the pay and display spots, or in parking that is illegal, etc. So I see a lot of that parking on the streets that I don't think you want, but it also adds cost to the building, because every time they take more time to go out and do something, if you're an hourly rate, it adds to costs.
So
you're looking
thank you, Linda.
Yep. Okay. Sorry.
I just have another follow-up question for you. So with respect to finding that right balance, obviously there needs to be enough parking on site that will allow the building to be served properly without disruptions to the public right of way. So your deputation is I believe saying that we need to find that right balance with respect to this parking, as well as parking made available to service vehicles when they are there to service the building. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm looking at that balance, and I don't want to get into specifics right now because we're looking at a study, but I just want to make sure that the study provides that scope and has the opportunity to access some of the professionals that we can't access through the working group process on a specific project.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you so much, Linda. Questions of staff? Seeing none, speakers? Councillor Ainsley.
Yep.
Go ahead, Councillor.
I'll be brief. I put forward this report request. I hope that staff will continue moving it forward. I think it's long overdue. We haven't had any changes or updates to our parking regulations around new developments since almost 1985. So I'm happy to see this is going to continue moving forward, and I ask for the committee's support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Perks.
Sorry, Madam Chair, I did have a couple of quick questions. I didn't want to interrupt Councillor Ainsley. I was waving my hand furiously.
Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor, I didn't see you there. So you have questions of staff?
Sorry, I thought Councillor Perks was waving in support of me.
Yeah, we all thinking you were saying hello to Councillor Ainsley.
Absolutely.
Questions of staff, Councillor Perks, is that it?
Yeah, just a couple of quick
go ahead.
things.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that a couple of more nuanced issues are being handled. One of them that has been a consistent pain just thorn in my side, has been the issue of when we allocate parking spaces in buildings for car share programs. And what I have had happen is 6 months or 2 years or 5 years down the road, the condominium corporation doesn't want to deal with that hassle, or there become issues about who's allowed to access what part of the building, and we lose it. Is this part of what you will be looking at in your review?
Through the speaker, I would say yes, it's kind of part of that overall, I don't want to disparage parking, but it's a complex web of issues, and we need to coordinate with transportation services because they're looking at a number of issues that relate to parking off-site in communities, and we need to look at the myriad of issues on-site or on private developments, including the one that you just raised.
Thank you so much. That's all I needed to know. Sorry for interrupting the flow of the conversation.
No problem. Any other speakers on the item? If I could get my screen back. Sorry, just give me a second. Councillor Wong Tam, go ahead.
Hand up. Thank you very much. I want to thank staff for the report, and obviously it's just the beginning of the work that they need to do, I should say. And also to thank all the councillors as well as all the transportation staff that will be doing this work. Being able to strike that balance of course, providing adequate parking as we address the ongoing modal shift that's taking place right now in cities, and at the same time being able to ensure that the transportation pieces of right-of-way occupancy is done in a manner that actually does not harm the community. And I just want to cite that, as this work is going to take place and as consultation is going to be broadened, as we roll out and talk to different stakeholders, there will be some competing interests. And I want to be mindful that competing interests can sometimes be lopsided. So therefore, we will probably hear from those who are going to be advocating for additional capacity to park cars. But I think that it needs to be taking place directly on sites and directly contained in buildings. Oftentimes we've seen, especially in the urban center where the roadways are very narrow, where there's a lot of density. Basically, you've got 500, 600 units, put into a tower. And as everyone sort of gets out to travel to work and to their place of where they're going, oftentimes they'll use the sidewalks, which we know are substandard in terms of widths, but oftentimes they might be driving. And what we have seen is this conflict where we have to decide on who do we prioritize. And I'm going to encourage here and now that we continue to prioritize the vulnerable road users, that we continue to embrace the modal shifts that are taking place. And that buildings that are being built, and there will be developers lobbying for this, is that they don't need to provide additional on-site parking for their residents, which I don't think this is. I don't disagree with. But one thing that they do need to provide, and I think this is important for us to note, as Linda Brett has mentioned in her deputation, is that they should provide, at the very minimum, adequate visitor parking spaces and adequate service spaces for utility vehicles, for maintenance crews. None of those vehicles should be in the public right-of-way, especially since we are already trying to put in cycling infrastructure. The more on-street parking we have, the less cycling infrastructure, the less ability to widen sidewalks, the less ability to animate the streets for alternative uses. So we need to be able to embrace what is to come. And if we drive to that outcome with the mindset of what do we want to achieve with this report and the work that's going to be underway, is that we need to be able to strive for a much higher vision of city building, so we don't get necessarily mired too deeply into the details of how many parking spots are the right parking spaces, but we need to be able to ensure that the facilities that are being built have the functionality that will be able to meet the demands and the service requirements of that building without the impediments in the public right of way. And I'll look forward to the consultation and the report to come back. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other speakers on the item? No problem. Just give me 1 second. I just need to get my screens back. Any other speakers? Seeing none. Okay. We're ready to vote. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Item number 5, requesting secondary plan west of the downtown core. Any questions on the item? Seeing none. Speakers? None. Okay. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Item 6, Committee of Adjustment changes to improve tenant participation. Questions? You have questions or you want to speak, Councillor Ainsley?
I have questions.
Okay, go ahead.
And I think they're quick questions. Madam Chair, I was just trying to understand from staff. Before COVID, there didn't seem to be any real deadlines for submissions from the public to Committee of Adjustment. And now It seems that there's a deadline of 5 days. There's a 5-day submission deadline before the actual meeting for members of the public. I'm just trying to find out. I get a lot of complaints about that. People are saying to me that 3 business days would be a more appropriate deadline. And the other concern I have that ties into that with the deadline is that for myself as a city councillor, trying to understand the concerns of my community, if I could be able to see submissions from the public a day before the Committee of Adjustment.
Through the Deputy Mayor, Mr. Mitzi's here and hopefully can help answer your questions.
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, there is a 5-day deadline right now since we went to a virtual format. And that has been done to allow us to electronically package the entire agenda for the panel members. We do advise anyone who wants to write in that could be followed up with registering to speak directly at the hearing or on the hearing date. We did not have a formal deadline prior to going virtual, but we did package up agendas then and submitted them to the members ahead of meetings. They need a day or 2 or 3 to understand what's on the agenda. And even then, we signaled, whether it was through communication on our website or directly with people that wrote in, that submitting letters late in the process doesn't guarantee it will get before the members. So while there wasn't a formal deadline prior to COVID, late submissions were always problematic. Now, I can say that we are reporting to Planning and Housing on April 22nd on a number of notice and participation questions that came up through motions at the last 2 councils. So we'll address some of these issues then.
Okay, so I guess the problem I'm having, Michael, and my residents are having is you just said 3 days. It takes you 2 to 3 days to get a package together. But the cutoff right now is 5 days, which is causing a lot of problems for my residents that want to submit something to Committee of Adjustment.
Right. Part of that 5-day comes from that most of our hearings are on the Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday, and there's the weekend before that. So we package it up prior to the weekend. One of the items we're going to come back with to the April meeting on is extending the time frame between when we circulate notice and when the hearing or when that deadline occurs. So in other words, we are changing our templates and the programming in our internal IVMS system so that we can get notice out a few days sooner than we have historically been able to, so that there is a larger time frame for your residents when they get notice in the mail to prepare a written response prior to a deadline. That's one of the measures we are changing this month, and we'll be reporting back on.
Okay, all right, because one of the concerns, as I've said, so for Scarborough Committee of Adjustment is on the 27th, and under the guidelines that are being currently followed, so the deadline submission is actually tomorrow. So that's a big concern from our residents. So thank you, Madam Chair. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions? Councillor Nunziata, go ahead.
Just have one question on that point by Councillor Ainslie. I'm getting similar complaints as well, because some of the residents don't receive the notice in time. But as far as the deadline, it's also for councillors as well. Am I correct?
Yes, it's for everyone that submits. Now, there is,
right.
I can say that if something comes in late, we still post it to the AIC and we still brief the members prior to the hearing on what's come in. The problem is it just doesn't make it with the package submission that goes to the members sometimes. That's the problem.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, speakers? Councillor Ainsley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did have an amendment to your letter. I don't know if you would consider it friendly. I did send it to the committee clerk.
Yeah.
And it's basically asking for a formalized deadline for submissions to be the feasibility for asking staff to look at reviewing 3 days before the actual meeting, and also asking them to review the feasibility of providing a period of 1 business day after the notice deadline for councillors to review the material from the community. And I think in this day and age, as we're trying to move towards paperless meetings, which we are doing now, and having a package to the members of Committee of Adjustment in the same format electronically is very feasible. And I think that looking at a deadline of 3 days is very appropriate. And I ask for the committee's support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other speakers? Seeing none, thank you. I will move that on behalf of Councillor Ainsley, and I'll consider that a friendly amendment. And so with that, all those in favor? That carries. Okay. Item as amended. All those in favor? Oppose? That carries.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Item number 7, update on short-term rental regulations. Any questions of staff? No. This was an item from Councillor Fletcher, but I don't see her here. Okay. All those in favor? And that, Councillor Fletcher is back. There she is. Councillor, do you have questions of staff? We can't hear you. Councillor Fletcher?
I'm just voting in favor, Speaker, Chair.
Oh, just for, okay. All those in favor?
I'm almost out of battery, and I think I can make it to the end of the meeting if my...
Okay, let's try that. All those in favor? That opposed? That carries?
In favor.
Okay.
In favor.
And our last item on the agenda, an item introduced by Councillor Wong Tam, stopping the demolition to protect Ontario's heritage at the Dominion Foundry buildings. Any questions?
Madam Speaker, it's Councillor Wong Tam speaking. Are you asking for questions of staff or questions of the...
Just give me 1 second. Staff is just trying to tell me something. Okay. Just to inform the committee, there's still very small friendly amendments being done. It's basically the letter had asked things like the chief planner to go to the province, and it has to be amended because, you know, the chief planner could not go directly. So staff is just working, I believe, with the councillor's office and clerks to ensure that everything is correct. But I think the intent of the motion is exactly what it has been put in front of you. And so in the meantime, if there's anybody that has questions of staff or the councillor, because she moved the item, we can put those forward. Do you have, Councillor, questions of staff, Councillor Wong Tam?
Thank you. I heard Councillor Fletcher's voice. Councillor Fletcher, were you about to ask something?
I was just going to have a confirmation that that particular site, and you're probably going to ask the same question, is not actually slated as an affordable housing site. That would be because it's being paraded as it's for the affordable housing, and I think that should be clarified. I'm sure you were going to do that. I was just trying to fill in between.
Go ahead, Councillor Fletcher. I think you raised a very important question, and perhaps Mr. Lintern can put his answer on the record for us.
Through the Deputy Mayor, the question is whether or not the site has been slated as an affordable housing site. My information and understanding is gained from various press releases and information provided by the province that indicates that the site, the site has an MZO on it, which was ordered by a Ministry of Zoning order, which was ordered in October, I believe, by the province. There have been indications that some of the housing on the site will be affordable housing. I do not have any information beyond some general comments that have been made by the province. I don't want to characterize those comments in any specific manner. I just don't have specific information that I can provide you with that indicates the nature of the affordable housing, the way that it will be delivered. I'm not sure if Ms. Bond, who's on the call, has had any other discussions about it, but the MZO itself does not require affordable housing. So I assume it's going to be delivered through some sort of procurement process that is yet to be disclosed. I'm not sure if Abby wants to add anything to that.
Through the chair, all I would add is we have also not really had any discussions yet with the province on this topic. They have indicated that they do intend to include affordable housing and have requested, I think, a pre-application meeting with staff to begin those discussions. So that is really all the information I have at the moment.
Councillor Fletcher, do you have another question?
No?
I think maybe I was just trying to fill in.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Finessed, so.
Thank you, thank you for attempting to run the clock. Madam Chair, I have some questions of staff, if I may now.
Okay. Go ahead, Councillor.
Okay, thank you very much. To our Chief Planner, with respect to the standards and guidelines for conservation of provincial heritage property, which is a provincial heritage policy document, contained in that document is some very specific requirements that the province must do and undertake when considering alterations and demolitions of their heritage assets. Is it true that contained in that document there is a requirement for public engagement and consultation?
Through the speaker, I'm going to ask Mr. Mueller to respond to your question. I believe he's on the call.
If you can hear me through the chair, thank you very much. Yes. So in the standards, provincial standards and guidelines for the conservation of provincial heritage properties, yes, public engagement is a requirement of the process associated with putting together or undertaking a heritage impact assessment. And in addition, in the terms of reference for heritage impact assessments as set by the province for provincial work by ministries and prescribed public bodies like Infrastructure Ontario, public or community engagement is also a requirement.
Has there been any evidence, any documentation of any public engagement and consultation with respect to these properties and its current status, which is they're being demolished right now?
Through the chair, I understand from correspondence we received from the province last night that a heritage impact assessment was submitted in fall of 2020.
I'm asking about public consultation.
And certainly within the, so that means it's been done fairly recently, this heritage impact assessment, and I'm not aware of any public consultation or community engagement within that realm of time, so no.
And just to, sorry, can I supplement just with what Mr. Mueller said when he said that it's been submitted? I believe, Joe, you mean that it was, that we're being told it was prepared, but we do not have that in our possession. Is that correct, Joe?
Thanks for that clarification, Greg. Yes, apparently the ministry has had a consultant do it for Infrastructure Ontario, but we have not seen any sign of that. We're requesting a copy.
Given the interests of the community, given the nature of demolition work, which is happening right now as we speak, the City of Toronto should have an opportunity to review any supporting documents and studies that the province claims to have prepared. Will we be getting that information?
We're in the process of preparing a letter. We received we wrote them on Saturday. We received a response to our letter around 1 a.m. this morning. We're in the process of preparing a response to that letter. And in our letter, we will be requesting that the province provide us with all the materials that they have prepared or have had prepared.
In the provincial heritage policies, is it not correct that they have, it states that removal or demolition of heritage assets should be the last resort, the last thing that we consider, the final action when all other attempts to address the heritage have failed? Is that not correct?
Joe?
Yes, that is correct.
And as far as you are aware, we have no provision of evidence of the studies. There's been zero public consultation to that effect. And is it your opinion that it seems that the province is ignoring or willfully neglecting its own responsibilities and honoring their own provincial heritage policies?
Judgmental, but I'd say thus far the work is deficient. So they're not.
I would only add that we're aware of, Councillor, I think in fairness to the whole conversation, we want to encourage the province to collaborate with us and provide us with everything that they've had to come to the decision that they've come to. And we don't have a line of sight on all of that information. And hence it is not the way that we do business here at the city, and it's not the way that we come to these decisions. So we're only asking the province to participate in a full discussion with us so that we can understand why they've chosen to do what they're doing.
Thank you. Has the developer been selected by the province as of yet?
We're not aware that any developer has been selected, no.
And no development application has been submitted, is that correct?
That's correct.
And have you ever seen a government actor behave in such a manner in your long and distinguished history with respect to destroying heritage assets in broad daylight without proper documentation, without public consultation, to the protests of just about everybody, I would believe, including the local community? Have you ever seen such behavior from a government body before?
Well, I'll just comment more generally, Councillor, and leave the observations that you make to the political sphere, if you will. I think from my point of view as a professional planner, we like to operate under, and the city building that we do in Toronto, we like to operate with as much transparency as possible and sharing information, and often working with communities to make sure that we've taken every possible or looked at every possible avenue before we resort to a demolition of the significant heritage resource that we believe sits on the site. And we know that the West Don Lands is an award-winning community. There are ways to do things in the West Don Lands that we've spent a lot of time and energy on over the years to get to this point. And we want to exhaust all avenues before we resort to losing heritage resources, which we feel are integral to the character and the history of the area, and in fact, could really positively shape the future of the area.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions of staff? Seeing none, speakers? Councillor Wong-Tam.
Councillor, yes, thank you very much. And thank you to the committee members and to the staff. Actually, I should say thank you to the staff who have been working with my office almost nonstop since Thursday evening. A team of litigators from the City of Toronto hunkered down on Friday afternoon to pore over every single provincial and federal statute, to review the planning policies that guide the provincial governments and how they treat these assets. And before you is a letter with a set of clear recommendations. There's probably going to be further refinements as we get to City Council. This situation on the ground is so fluid and dynamic. that it is literally changing hour by hour. So I just want to thank all the staff who've been able to provide us with some guidance, and my staff and the community with guidance as we've been able to try to navigate what is very rocky and dangerous terrain. I want to cite the fact that, you know, the heritage assets that sit on the Foundry complex, the Dominion Foundry complex, is the largest concentration of heritage assets in the 80-acre West Don Land precinct. It actually represents, in some tall order, the history of this country, because it was actually an industrial site where we manufactured railway technology and parts at that time. And we know that this country was forged with a ribbon of steel as we connected our territories and provinces from coast to coast. So this is actually not just a piece of history that belongs to Toronto or Ontario. It's actually a part of Canadian history. And we know that without the railway technology that was manufactured from these grounds, these sites and out of these buildings, we would not have the Confederation lay the foundation for the formation of this country as we do today. There is absolutely no reason whatsoever how the provincial government is undertaking this work. They are rapidly razing and demolishing these 4 heritage properties that have been listed on the Toronto's registry since 2004. They're doing this without a demolition. They're doing this without a development partner named. They're doing this without a development application. They're doing this after the site has been sitting there for 40 years without any necessarily any plans or consultation. And what you heard from the chief planner as well as Mr. Moeller from Heritage Preservation Services is that the province themselves is neglectful, willfully neglecting their own obligations to follow their heritage policies, which they just recently updated. The question before us is that if they can't follow their own heritage policies, why should any private sector developer, any municipality care? We have no option but to care. City Council has to take a stand, and this stand must be vigorous, it must be loud, and it must be enthusiastic, and it must actually ride with the support of the community, because they will be there for council. We need to do everything in our powers to hold the provincial government to account. And that means that they have to provide us proof, bring us receipts that they have done the prerequisite work that they claim that they have done, which is the provision of the Heritage Impact Assessment, which is the provision of the Strategic Conservation Plan, or any other environmental assessment documentation that exists. And they need to do this under the banner of broad public consultation as stipulated in the provincial guidelines. There is no reason to rush to develop. As of yesterday, we had community members standing in front of the Foundry buildings begging the demolition crew to stop. This community has written letters to the province, not just within the past 5 days. They've been actually raising this issue with the province for a number of years now, asking the province to come to the table and to work with them to build out the Foundry sites so that they can repurpose these beautiful and elegant stately buildings while we intensify and build affordable housing. The ministerial zoning orders actually released in October said nothing to the effect of provision of affordable housing or the retention of heritage. That is not the way we would write our zoning bylaws, but the way that ministerial zoning order was written, it actually was written almost if it had a development application in mind, except for we haven't seen the details. It was written by a developer or a development lawyer that knew exactly what they were asking for. And any discussion and talk from the provincial government that they're doing this largely because of what the need to build affordable housing, councillors, you know that we have been on the forefront of demanding and asking and pleading the province to work with us to build rapid affordable housing across the city. And we know that in every single incident is actually the provincial government that has oftentimes fallen short. So the question here before us is that if truly the province wanted to build affordable housing and work with the local community and city planning, they would have done so. But instead, they chose a different path. They've chosen a path of vandalism. They've chosen a path of willful neglect. And we need to, as a council, be able to stand up to those bully tactics, defend the heritage assets that belong not necessarily to one person, being the premier or one minister, but these assets belong to the people of Ontario. The provincial government holds them in trust on our behalf, and they have a responsibility to actually respond to us and to engage with us so we can collaboratively work in partnership to revitalize the West Don Lands so it can be the premier award-winning precinct it has been for all these years. Many dreams have been attached to this, and we want to see them fully realized. We want to work with the province. Thank you very much, ma'am, to our deputy mayor, and thank you to all the councillors as well as the city staff for your support.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm going to ask you to look at your email and just review what clerks just sent to you. We need you to just very briefly take a look at that. And I'm going to ask if there are any councillors that would like to speak on this item so we can give the opportunity to Councillor Wong Tam to review the last very few changes that legal and clerks had to do on the motion. I think Councillor Fletcher would like to speak. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. Go ahead.
If it goes off, I'm wiped out, madam. I'm wholeheartedly supporting my neighboring colleague, Councillor Wong Tam, and I thought that was an extremely eloquent intervention today. You captured so many important things. I just want to touch on one thing. The history of rail in the southern part of our city is so incredibly important to the economy that was built and on which we rest today. I have a zone at Carlaw and Dundas, which had, I think, 10 different rail companies coming through there. We have an obelisk that has been crafted in particular homage to the importance of rail lines in building industry. That was an industrial center. And I agree fully that we need to honor our industrial heritage that helped build the city, not simply homes and residences. I also want to say that there is emerging kind of a favorite trick of this provincial government. And that is to say, oh, we're doing that. They know what we want in the city of Toronto. We want affordable housing. We want transit. Those are things that we're very committed to as a council and as neighborhoods, as residents. We know those are critical things. And so to say we're knocking it down for affordable housing, that's marketing. They're knocking it down for developers. Let's be frank. This is a developer government at Queen's Park. We see that from the all of the ministerial zoning orders that have come into place. We see that from the Greenbelt. We see that our former tiny perfect mayor, who's still tiny and still perfect, quit the Greenbelt Council over the steps that the provincial government had taken. There is an unwritten rule here where we balance interests. We don't simply have developer interests front and center. But at this juncture, developer interests are front and center. I'm going to hearken over to transit, because for transit and the Ontario line, which is popular, it's being built for developers so that Cadillac Fairview can have an at-grade station at East Harbor. The rest of the community is going to be impacted in a way the city would never do and never foresee. That's a developer plan. So I think we have to start peeling back all of these high-sounding phrases, peeling back the commitments to different things and understand them for what they really are. This is the panzer movement of large developers in our city by the provincial government to do whatever they would like, to bulldoze anything, to ride roughshod over communities, and then use the fancy phrases, oh, it's for affordable housing, we know you want that. Oh, it's for transit, that's so important, we have to do it like this. That is phony talk. I'm 100% behind you, Councillor. I'd like a recorded vote on this here and any other time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher.
Turning my video off now.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Any other speakers on the item? Okay. Councillor Wong-Tam, are you ready?
I am Deputy Mayor.
Okay.
The clerks should have the revision up now.
In the meantime, I do want to thank staff and the local councillor for under what a lot of pressure in the last few days. They've been doing an incredible amount of work to try to save these buildings. And I think what has been asked here, I think there's three main buckets. It's just transparency, for the provincial government to be transparent with the city and with the public. Let us know what the plans are. Share with us what you're planning. Share with us the work that you've done. Open up with the community. The second bucket is exactly that. It's not only show it to the community, but work with the community. This is actually an area that has done a lot of work, a lot of planning work in the West Don Lands. Community members, local councillors, the city has done an incredible amount of work to plan for that area and to plan for complete communities. And, you know, you don't build a city just with one thing in mind. You build a city by creating the complete communities. That involved heritage elements, that involved community spaces, that involved affordable housing, that involved market housing. And this community is committed to those things and willing to work in a collaborative way. I'm going to support the motion and once again want to thank everybody that has been working on this to make sure that it's not either or. I think everybody wants to work together to how to achieve this affordable housing that seems to be the main reason for tearing down the heritage. It doesn't have to be either or. I think everybody is willing to roll up their sleeves and to work towards ensuring that we maintain the great heritage that exists in those buildings that could be amazing spaces for all kinds of activities and continue to have a plan that includes affordable housing in there. So with that, I think we're ready to move on Councillor Wong-Tam's motion, and Councillor Fletcher has asked for a recorded vote, so let's proceed with that.
All those in favor of the amendment before you, please indicate how you're voting when I call your name. Councillor Bradford?
Favor?
Councillor Perks?
In favor?
Councillor Fletcher?
In favor.
Councillor Bailão?
In favor.
Councillor Wong-Tam?
In favor.
Councillor Nunziata?
Favor.
That motion carries unanimously.
Thank you, and that concludes our business today. Thank you to all the members of the committee, and thank you to all staff and clerks. Stay safe, and we'll see each other soon at some meeting or at council. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Matt.
you.